This is day 2 of the June 87 7-day retreat. The remarks yesterday during the talk about authority created a lot of resonance in many people, which was brought to meetings. We were discussing it further with many people, so that it seems more needs to be said here, pointed out, looked at, about this whole complex phenomenon of authority. The desire for authority, the pleasure of following authority, pleasure or security, feeling of being taken care of, absolved from standing alone, thinking for oneself, that aspect of it. And the other side of it, the having lived under an authoritarian system, which for most human beings, I think very few excluded, starts right from the beginning of our life in our family to then in pre-nursery, nursery. There are pre-nurseries now. There are an incredible amount of pre-nursery and pre-kindergarten schools coming up. In our religious churches, organizations, groups, authority of the political party or ideology under which one lives, and so forth. The pleasure or convenience or comfort in following, and on the other side, having grown up under this system, the rebellion against it. Maybe not rebellion against where it originated, usually not, but directing the aggression, anger, rebelliousness against another authority or another victim. This time oneself not being the victim, but the authority figure who inflicts authority upon others, and the pleasure of that. Convenience, pleasure. Power, the power of it, and the pleasure of power. More will come up as we talk about it. People have mentioned too, at work, working with each other, place of work, a job, an office, or a community. The problem of relationship. Is one person exerting power one or more people exerting power upon the others willingly following, or a fight, a struggle, a power struggle. Or is one exerting, if one is in a position of power, of supervision, exerting power unawares, and even though people are following, there is a grievance against this person who is exerting authority. How does one work together? That's a very fascinating, important question. Is it possible to really cooperate, work together? I won't say without exerting authority, because this is what all of us bring to the situation. Wanting to follow, wanting to exert it, wanting to follow it, and also wanting to rebel of it. Rebel against it. I think that's in all of us, this whole bundle. We bring that to a group situation, a work situation. One aspect more developed, more intensity to it than the others. How can we cooperate? Given this fact that we all bring to one degree or another the desire and yearning to follow for the safety of it, comfort, the belongingness, the absolution from thinking for oneself and maybe standing alone. And then the urge to exert power oneself, trying to get to that position of power, the pleasure of it, and the rebellion against authority, usually directed against someone outside. And maybe a fourth aspect we haven't mentioned, which, unless one really looks and sensitively is aware, is very important. And this is the inner authority, one's own inner authority, one's own past, one's experiences, one's opinions. The whole compellingness of our actions is our inner authority. Usually unquestioned, until it becomes too burdensome, too painful, too strapping. The inner authority of our past. I think it's been the psychoanalysts who have brought most to the attention of the modern mind the power of early experiences, of early training methods, the early conditioning, and then the phenomenon of taking those early rules and regulations and behaviors imposed, demanded, imprinted through punishment and reward, taking those inside of oneself. At a certain point in human development, parents aren't so necessary anymore. They keep functioning, and very often to the annoyance of the child, because the child has introjected this stuff now, which is very well in evidence when the older sibling punishes or tries to educate the younger one. Hit her for doing something that oneself had been hit for. And then the confusing thing, this is just an aside, the parents stepping in and saying, don't do that. That's bad. So something new has to be learned. What was considered good and right for one's own good, one cannot, at that point, perpetuate. One has to wait. It's for the parents right now to punish the smaller sister or brother. Particularly with girls, it used to be this way, it may be changing. Be imprinted upon brother's mind not to hit sister. I saw in front of our house a father walking by with his little son, repeatedly hitting him for having hit his sister. And the command being uttered at the time of hitting him, you don't do that, that's not being done. But we were talking about the introjection of authority, that it sits here now. Yeah, I'm pointing here, in here too, in the brain. Conditioned programs. The benefit of following authority, because this is how we are trained, it's for your own good to follow, to obey, to be punished. So usually a child doesn't blame the parents for it. Blames himself. I think most of us recollect this, know this pattern operating now. It's not a matter of recollecting, but seeing it operate now, how easily one will take guilt upon oneself. Something that has gone wrong. Or blame someone else. Not the person on whom one depends or has depended for one's life. So how can we work together? Certainly not with all of this stuff being unconscious, operating unawares. This is where our frictions come from, our conflicts with each other and battles. I think one can see quite clearly, even logically, intellectually clearly, that there can only be a real, genuine cooperation among people if no one brings authority to the situation. Everybody is open to work together and find out what the situation demands. But most of the time we don't know that what we bring and suggest and insist upon is this inner authority which has been computed or programmed into us. We think this is the right way. We're attached to it, we're identified with it. And so is the other, A, B, C. So there are conditioned opinions and patterns fighting each other. And the feeling, if I let go of that, I don't think this is the thought pattern, but I can't let go. It's me there, in there. But it isn't me. It is just one's programmed, conditioned ways of thinking. And the desire to insist, to dominate. The pleasure of that, the fear of being overruled or humiliated by others, not accepting one's way. And where is the actual issue that one was trying to cooperate about? That's not there. It's these patterns that are battling it out. Observe these things. At work, or we're in the family. Anywhere where people get together to do something together. Shed light on this. Not take anything of this for granted, that it has to be this way, this is the right way. But to question the inner compulsions and need to follow, need to usurp, become powerful oneself, to assert, or to rebel. Often it's felt that if one rebels against authority, one has put authority behind one has put it aside, one is free of it. That's not so. Rebelling against authority is the authority ingrained me. Rebelling against authority. And then as has been shown in history, after the revolution, the revolutionary become the holders and wielders of the power. Revolution on a large scale or on a small scale. If this whole pattern isn't discerned and seen in action and understood, with all its benefits, its the fringe benefits. The pleasure taken care of, the enjoyment of power, or what all goes with it. If that isn't questioned and understood, we perpetuate it. Justifying it, or not even needing to justify it, it's so right. Some people have mentioned seeing the functioning inwardly of rules all the time, for every situation, verbalizing for oneself rules, not necessarily the rules that are given, but one brings them. And the need, the compulsion to live within these rules, internalized rules and adaptable to a new situation, maybe changed a little bit, but it's rules for controlling oneself and the situation. And the accompanying feeling, if this is accomplished, that one feels good, one is good. If one transgresses the rules, one is bad. And the guilt feelings that accompany that. On the one hand, feelings of safety and goodness. On the other hand, feelings of guilt and badness, worthlessness, and so forth. Which is the perpetual operation of our first imprints. This must be so utterly powerful for a totally helpless, totally dependent child. Cannot exist on its own, cannot say, all right, I'm leaving at age 5 months or a year. Has to go along for better or worse, he or she. And it becomes plain so early. If one smiles and is doing what the parents need, then there is rapport, there is warmth or touch, hug, kiss, something special done for one, or just the attention, the warmth of the friendly look out of the parents' eyes. Been watching it with amazement and being with 2 little grandchildren. How early the discerning starts almost from the beginning. The looking, the discerning, the learning. Because there's also very early rebellion, and very early the child learns what happens in parents when the child rebels. Parents don't like it. Don't like it. It may evoke different feelings, but in general it's disapproval, anxiety, threat, maybe panic, all dating back to one's own childhood, which has been forgotten. Something very unsettling about a crying child, a rebellious child, a child that is obstinate or defiant. And one finds oneself practicing pretty much the same methods that were practiced on one, unless there's some new insight taking place. Of course, one may have read books, and one reads your books furiously when these things happen, because one doesn't know what to do. One never questions whether one has to do anything. That is usually not an option. As a parent, one has to do something when the child is defiant. And if one doesn't want to do what the parents did, then one may do the opposite, or what Dr. Spock says, or somebody who writes with authority. And the magazines for parents, there are so many now, are just crammed full with how to bring up children. And there are blurbs on the radio and so forth. But that's not meeting a defiant or crying or rebellious child directly, without a method, without knowing what to do. And maybe allowing for a moment the discomfort in oneself, and allowing the child his or her feelings. Without immediately controlling them, crushing them, punishing them in some way or other. Depending maybe how strongly we were ourselves conditioned, we will respond to this crying, defiant child. I don't mean crying for some legitimate reason. We say this is legitimate, but this is not. Defiance of a request to do something, or to stop a misbehavior. If it is crushed, punished harshly, that becomes introjected in a child. Punishment for being bad and reward for being good. And the rules too, eventually, if the parents were quite consistent in their way of punishing and rewarding, these rules are introjected. This is what we feel now. I have to have rules, inner voices. This is what I should do, this is what I should not do. Guilty feeling here, good feeling there. The inner authority is there, isn't it? And with that, one finds one's place in the school system, or in the church system, or in the work system. Can one look at all that air, let it come to light and life in oneself, and not let the rules, the attitudes crush a feeling immediately, but to see the functioning of these introjected rules, to see them functioning, and the consequences. We talked about the little child who was not allowed to punish or hit the sister for doing something that he would be punished or was punished for. And also, amazingly early, there is, in children as well as adults, we're all of the same stuff, a longing, a yearning for power. Desire for power and the pleasure of it. The power battles that go on between children and parents who are not bringing up their children with the iron consistency with which it maybe used to be the case. Then there's power struggle. Who is on top? And that also, it doesn't end. It goes on. Working, living in an authoritarian structure, and the drive to get that power for oneself, to rise in the system at work, military, political, church, spiritual groups, so hierarchically structured. Which is part of what perpetuates systems. The inbuilt rewards of progressing, advancing to more powerful position. Because whoever can advance and does advance wants to perpetuate the system, which is one source of power and income. And there are always being all of us too who like to be told what to do. And then those of us at times who rebel against all this and overthrow the system, only to install ourselves in the place of power. Can one observe this in one's intimate circles in which one lives and works? And how does one observe it? I think it's dangerous and limiting to bring theory to it. Although, having first become acquainted with a theory, it may open up things or reveal things that one has never seen. But the theory is not the important thing. To uphold that becomes the authority. That happens so much in schools. Since we did mention the psychoanalytical school, it's split into so many schools now. And psychology, I don't know how many theories and schools there are. There's no peace among them. My sister happens to be a psychoanalyst. We were visiting last year and she went to a convention and just reported for hours about the power struggles even within one school among different outlooks. And regular power struggles with allies and voting and so forth. So it happens everywhere. It happens when two people live together, doesn't it? There may be a real issue to talk about, to be discussed, a real genuine disagreement, but that itself is not so difficult to settle if one doesn't bring a need for winning or dominating to this unconsciously or subconsciously. Because if we're free from the compulsions to win or not to lose, not to be humiliated through loss, then we can very clearly see the facts at hand, both of us, and the facts will decide. Maybe one person doesn't see it as clearly as the other, so it's nice. Somebody points out something that I didn't see, that you didn't see. If one isn't involved in this and needs to get fed from this, or is afraid of losing status, that's where the complications come in, don't they? And it's so enormously difficult to just be with the facts. When all systems, all these compulsive systems inside are go, yearning for satisfaction or offense, defense, retaliation. Everything we see on the grand level, national level, takes place in one family. One could say, and this was also brought up in a meeting, not in this way. Please, sometimes when things are brought up in a talk, it may not be precisely what came up in a meeting or how it was expressed, which does not mean, if it's put differently here, that you were not understood or misunderstood. It doesn't mean that. But if we need to clarify it again, we'll do it every time, always fresh. No need to ever think, well, because I brought this up, I shouldn't bring this up again. When you come back in and we bring it up, we'll look at it new, because who remembers everything that was said last time? I don't. I can only start from scratch now. So, the situation that came up, having a supervisory position and people, that is an interesting thing, how we usually, habitually, and it's the common usage, how we put it. People work for me, we say. One may not mean much with it, but words have power. Language is very powerful on the mind of the one who says, people are working for me, and on the people who say, I'm working for so-and-so. Is this really a fact that somebody is working for one? We can spend a moment. It's just coming up right now. A person may have to report or hand in work to a supervisor, or a foreman or foreperson may supervise people and see, is the work getting done? And if the work is done, the person will report to the foreperson or supervisor and say, I'm done, is there something else? And that person who is the foreman or supervisor, it's his function or her function to know what needs to be done in this big total or whatever the size of the department is in that total situation. That person has that information. It's her or his duty to be informed what needs to be done and see to it that it gets done. But the ones who are doing it, are they doing it for that supervisor or foreperson? But we talk about it this way. We say these people work for me. And with such an expression, something very likely happens in the mind. One assumes an ancient role. It's not new. This is an archetype, means anciently present, ever present in this consciousness since the beginning of human beings working together, of the one in power. Having someone to work for, who works for one, and conversely working for somebody. So can one dismantle these expressions, at least internally, if it's not possible at the workplace, but maybe even there? Because a person who comes to take a job doesn't take a job to work for someone. We're working all together, aren't we? Maybe working for ourselves, working for a paycheck, to feed the family or to be able to buy equipment. I've mentioned it many times. I just had some extended dental work done, and every time this dentist says, "Open the mouth for me." It's clear, the mouth needs to be open, else you can't work in there. But this "for me." Doing it so that the darn tooth gets capped and doesn't break more. And we're all, in one aspect or other, people feel very inferior about ourselves. We've been programmed that too. We have inferior images of ourselves. And then these things help a little bit. Somebody's working for me. Somebody's opened the mouth for me. I'm something at least. I can ask, make a demand, and there comes a response and obedience of a sort. It gives a very temporary little boost. But these things don't last. They are compulsive. They have to be repeated. So the situation we started to talk about and getting away from many times. People reporting to one supervisor or foreman. And the person in charge, very much interested in getting this work done well, please the customers, to do well. This is how one has been brought up. Do something well at work or wherever you are. And demanding this from the people who are doing the work that needs to be done well. And the supervisory person so caught up with or concerned with that this job be done well and the customers be pleased, and in the process losing the people. I don't mean by losing that they leave, but come rating time, the people say, "I don't like this supervisor, it doesn't treat me right, doesn't treat me well or humanly friendly or whatever." Didn't go into all this detail. Is this something also very common, that the job, whatever it is, becomes so important due to whatever, all the training we've had or our fascination with it for whatever psychological reasons or other, that this is the important thing to see through to completion, to get done, to enhance, expand, and the ones who are doing the work just aren't there. They're not seen. They're only means to an end. And a genuine shock in this person when this was brought to his attention. Hadn't ever thought of it, hadn't noticed it, hadn't meant to do this willingly or intentionally. Is a very profound problem in our present society. Always has been, but it wasn't considered a problem. It didn't matter how many people died. The pyramid went up, or the Chinese wall, or the cathedral. The workers were just of no importance. They're just there for the glory of the project, the glory of the house of God, or the pharaohs, or whoever, defense. It hasn't changed much. We have introduced public relations training. I once sat in an airplane, on a rather lengthy airplane ride, next to a young person, immaculately dressed, charcoal grey suit and a silver tie, reading Xeroxed handbook on how to deal with people in the department, on how to execute good public relations. And the left side was almost on my knee, not quite, but I could read too. It was for both of us. I was amazed at what this person was incorporating into himself to execute, how minute little things, which one could call manipulative, were being learned how to have good public relations in the department, so that come the time of the rating, one wouldn't get bad ratings, because then one can't rise on the ladder. But I don't want to sound cynical. Maybe the person was genuinely interested in people and how to get along with them. But then the recommendation would be not to read about it, but meet these people. Not to have already an arsenal of methods to treat them well or diplomatically, but to be sensitive in their presence. It's not difficult. If one isn't all possessed by an arsenal of methods, and if one isn't possessed with the desire to climb or to do good for a different audience than the people who work there, who are on the project. One's audience is the board or the higher-ups. But if that audience is included, it's including everyone there. Not as a matter of public relations. For some reason, there's something that revolts against that word, because it already has this strongly manipulative association. One goes to these seminars. I don't know, I've never been to one. Maybe they're good. Maybe there's really a looking at each other, particularly seminar participants themselves. Maybe they look at each other. Not just are on a common goal again, a common cause of how to get better public relators. But see how we're relating right now with each other. Supervisors and non-supervisors. Meeting without gadgets, without images. And not knowing the outcome yet, not bringing anything to the meeting. One person described some meetings in a place where that particular person was working. He says everybody arrives with a railroad full of opinions and problems and wants and desires. That's a good description. So how do we work together? In the family, with children, without children, married, unmarried. How do human beings, two together or more, in a personal family situation at work or in a group like this, staff here, how do we work together? How do we see each other? As we mentioned before, if there's a felt need for somebody functioning as a supervisor, we've had this here with a building, somebody had to be foreman, foreperson. Particularly timelines. You could say, well, why do you say that? Why not question that too? And I've talked to two people who are very intensely involved with co-op work, where in each case there has to be consensus before a decision is made. Both persons left. They said, it's an impossible situation. You argue something for a whole year, and you still haven't decided what to do, and some things need urgently to be done. Because meanwhile, the co-op is disintegrating or something is going awry there with the customers. Also, what was mentioned by both of these people, independent in two different cities, was that there are always some new people coming who now bring this railroad full of new opinions and needs and feelings, which we discussed earlier. Maybe it has been settled among the old people, has been seen that let's leave aside power trips and defenses and needing to be identified with the issue. But then somebody arrives who has never done that before and is not aware of these things. So then it goes on again. So if one decides for this project there is going to be a person who's a supervisor, meaning gathering the information, having some know-how about what needs to be done, how it is being done, who needs to work here and where. How does one see that supervisor? Is it possible to see that supervisor factually, with all his or her particular idiosyncrasies, which all of us have? Not one of us who doesn't have idiosyncrasies, meaning some special character traits. Can one see that in a person? And see the person is not hindering the project, it's flowing, it's working? Or does one begin to project onto that person old authority images that one has had to put up with? Crucial times of one's life, hasn't been able to battle. And now he is an authority figure one can battle. Project it on and then punch it. That has to be examined too, doesn't it? How do we see ourselves as working for this person? One isn't working for the person, but doing what this person suggests or says needs to be done today. And how does one see the one who assigns the work? Is it plain, simple, factual? Or is it loaded with old and new images? and the emotions, resentments or wanting to please. Let go with those ancient and new images. Inevitable is all interconnected in this body-mind. Can one question it, wonder about it, look at it? Of course one can. We're all free to do this. We don't have to remain strapped in patterns. Psychological patterns, certain metabolic patterns they run. Thank goodness they run on their own. If they don't, hopefully we find somebody who understands something intelligently about those patterns to help in the healing. But psychological patterns can be questioned and may not have to be there at all, may be seen as a hindrance, as a division, as a sapper of energy. And without them, one may see much more clearly what needs to be done and some creativity being there, which doesn't come out of a pattern, which comes out of the moment, of free-flowing energy that's not hampered by needs to dominate or to be good or to not be humiliated. And where does one start this work is an also important question. Because our human tendency is to start in the other person. Try to help him or her see the light or understand himself or herself. And because it's so much easier, very much more easy to see problems in someone else. Particularly when they're very heavily guarded, hidden, or repressed in oneself. But to the extent that the inner veils are lifted, the locks are opened, the dam breaks, and there is not a running away from it, but a judgeless, choiceless observing of it, looking, listening. To that extent, one really understands the other. Because the same things operate in all of us to one degree or another. And then that understanding for another may have a genuine quality of compassion, not a learned pattern of being compassionate, which is offered in religious training. But learned compassion isn't compassion. Compassion has to well up genuinely out of depth of understanding this self. We may be deadly afraid of the dam breaking, because way back it brought us the danger of life and death. A little child can't survive alone without the care of the parent. And if the parent wants this, one better go along with it. One has no choice. But I think it's incredible to find out that one can survive a broken dam. Not only survive it, but the dam is the death, the deadening thing. Controls the inner authority. So the fear comes up. Can that be there, felt profoundly, moved with? Not I'm moving with a fear, that moment that's just fear. No owner of it, that's just fear. But fear and awareness don't exclude each other. But when there's awareness, this thing called fear doesn't need to be called that anymore. And then it isn't that anymore. It's something different. We will end here for today.